Hello everybody, it's Paul Neeson with Torah Life Ministries, and we're reading the Torah portion for this coming Shabbat. We're up to the 49th reading in this year's cycle, which will be Deuteronomy 21:10 to 25:19. And this is a very interesting Torah portion. There's going to be a lot of things that sound strange or laws or rulings that sound really weird, but we have to remember this is for the culture back then and at that time. And the culture is a little different today. The principles are the same or should be the same, but some of these things you're going to look at and you're going to say, what in the world are they talking about? For example, plowing the field with an ox and a donkey, which we don't do today. You know, we don't have to plow the field today with any animals because we have machinery to do it for the most part, unless you're a very small farm. So things like this, you got to look aside and understand this is the way it was done back then when they went into the land. And the same principles will apply today, is not to have unequal weights or do things unequally, to do things balanced. So keep that in mind when we go through this, and I'll remind you, of course, as we're up to these strange things. And there's many little sections in this week's Torah portion, so it goes from one subject to another subject quite often. But we're going to start off here. When you go out to battle against your enemies, and Yahweh your Elohim has given them into your hands, and you have taken them captive, and you have seen in the captivity a woman of beautiful form, and you desire her, even to take her for you for a wife, then you shall bring her into the midst of your household, and she shall shave her head and prepare her nails. Now, it's more things that she has to do, but it's not as barbaric as it seems, where, oh, you can go into war and you can see a woman and just take her. No, that would be kidnapping. Well, it goes beyond that. You know, she has to, at some point or form of to agree that this is what she wants. And it was very common for women in those days that were taken captive, where their village or their tribe or wherever they were living, where all the men were destroyed because of the battle. They had no choice but to accept this, because it was almost an honor that here I have a choice. I could be alone here with nothing, or I could be treated like a wife by this man who desires to have me. So it wasn't as barbaric as it sounds. But it goes on, she shall remove the clothing of her captivity from her, and she shall live in your house, and shall sorrow for her father and mother for a month of days. Then afterward you shall go into her, and shall marry her, and shall be a wife to you. So now this woman went from being a prisoner to a wife, and now she's going to be taken care of as a wife. It's the responsibility of righteous men of Israel to take care of these women that they marry as wives. However, they are told also not to marry women that are going to be praying and doing things, sacrifices to other gods, and so on. So there was an unspoken rule back then of what was to happen, and this woman needed to get right with Yahweh, or she wasn't going to continue this marriage, because the man should know he has a month to find out, which isn't a long time. But again, things were a little bit different back then. And it goes on to say, and it shall be, if you do not delight in her, and shall send her away at her desire, and you shall not at all sell her for silver, you shall not treat her as a slave, because you have humbled her. Now all this can take place only if the woman agreed to this. And again, she would want to agree to it, otherwise she'd be alone. And the culture back then had these guidelines to help these widows. Remember, a woman that's husband who's died in battle is now a widow, whether it's one of the women of Israel or one of the women of non-Israel, one of the places they were going to attack. Now we go into a controversial subject we started to touch upon in the last Torah portion, and it's verse 15. It says, if a man has two wives, the one loved and the other hated, and they have borne him sons, both the loved one and the hated one, and if the firstborn son was of her who was hated, then it shall be in a day that which he has caused his sons to inherit, that which is his. He is not able to cause to inherit the firstborn son of the one loved before the firstborn son of the one hated, who is truly his firstborn. So if a man had more than one wife, and we'll talk about that in a moment, and they each had a son, and he loved one wife and hated the other one, and I think they're trying to give an understanding he didn't hate her, but even if he hated her, but he didn't like her as much as the one he loved. Well, didn't matter. The firstborn son of his was going to be his firstborn son, and that was the one that was legally binding and had legal rights to his inheritance. Now there's a note here that says, although having multiple wives was never condoned in Scripture, we also never see it to be clearly defined as sin. Yet it is evident by example that family dysfunction would occur, and from the New Testament and Yeshua, we clearly see it was never the will of Yahweh and is forbidden to any new covenant believer. And he references Mark 10, 1-10. Well, let's just turn over to Mark 10, 1-10 and see what it says there, what he's referencing, because this is just a very controversial subject. And you know, again, I like that note because it wasn't forbidden or considered as sin. But let's see what Mark 10:1 says. And Mark 10:1 says, let's go here. Alrighty. And I usually don't jump around to the renewed covenant when I'm doing a Torah portion, but this is going to be a controversial subject. So Mark 10:1 to 10:10, it says, and rising up from there, he came into the borders of Judah by other side of the Jordan. And again crowds came together to him, and he again taught them as they were accustomed. And coming near, the Pharisees asked him if it's lawful for a man to put away a wife, tempting him. But he answered, he said to them, what did Moses command you? And they said, Moses allowed to write a bill of divorce and put away. And answering, Yeshua said to them, with respect to your hard-heartedness, he wrote them to command you. But from the beginning, Yahweh created and made them male and female. Because of this, a man shall leave his father and mother and shall be joined to his wife, and the two shall be one flesh. So it says the two shall be one flesh, so that they no longer are two, but are one flesh. Therefore, what Yahweh has yoked together, man cannot pull apart. So there it's talking about two made one. It didn't say multiple made one. So that is the example that the translator of these scriptures are using to say in the renewed covenant it was not condoned and it wasn't the plan of our Creator. But again, I'm going to reference the note here because it's very important to understand, as he says, although having multiple wives is never condoned in Scripture, we also never see it clearly defined as sin. So it's not defined as sin, and sin is transgression of the law, the guidelines, the instructions. So nowhere does it say it's not allowed. So I want to clarify that. Now it says here, yet it is evident by example that family dysfunction would occur, and from the New Testament and Yeshua, we clearly see it was never the will of Yahweh and is forbidden to any new covenant believer. Now that's what the note says. Now I don't necessarily agree that his argument saying it is evident by example that family dysfunction would occur, because I know many people that are married to one wife and they have family dysfunction, or they're getting divorced, which is family dysfunction. They're not happy. I don't know too many people with more than one wife, but I do know some. And to be honest, I don't see the same issues that they have of people that are one wife and one husband. Now, during scriptural times, we certainly saw family dysfunction in this, and we saw the problems it created. So I'm not going to say either way that it causes family dysfunction. I think if people in a marriage are holy or have a scriptural sense to things, the marriage is going to work. And there might be some bumpy road, but it's going to work. And if they're not, if they're focused on things of the world, then the marriage is doomed, whether it's one wife or multiple wives. Now, it was never defined as sin in the scripture. That's clear. Now, by saying he made one wife for one man to be yoked together in Mark, and by also saying in the beginning of the Bible, he made man and woman. He didn't say he made man and women for the man. He's one man and one woman. You can use that to say it should be one and one. But the fact that he doesn't say anywhere in Scripture not to do it, and some of the most holy people in the Scriptures had more than one wife, and shows that it wasn't necessarily shunned. And we have to look at the meanings of these things and so on. Now let me be clear, everybody. I have one wife. I'm very happy with one wife. I don't want another wife. From a scriptural sense, you know, it's not condemned. From a worldly sense, in the United States today, it's against the law But from a good amount of countries around the world, it's not against the law and quite common. And again, I'm not going to say what this translator says, that it causes dysfunction, because he assumes all the time it does. And I've seen, and you know, you can see a marriage from the outside, and even if it's one man and one wife, it might seem like everything's fine, but really maybe it's not. But the few marriages I've seen that was more than one wife, it seemed fine from the outside. I don't know what was going on the inside. But I will say again, I don't think it's necessary. I think one man and one wife is fine and perfect, and you could use examples in Scripture where it shows that's the will of Yahweh. But I'm not going to go say it's against Yahweh's word and it's evil or bad, and certainly not sin. So, you know, there's a saying that you make your bed, now you got to lay in it. Well, you know, you're creating relationships, and you got to deal with them. And they're your relationships, not mine. So I do know in Scripture he completely calls homosexuality an abomination, but he certainly doesn't call marriage to multiple women an abomination. But so I'm not, you know, it's another topic I'll talk about another time. We talked about it enough, but if you have an opinion about it, you can put it below the message here. Again, don't get me wrong. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm not condemning it, and I'm not supporting it. I'm just telling you what the Scriptures say about it. Okay, so going on here, it says, but he shall respect the firstborn, the son of the head of one, by giving him the double portion, all that he has. For he is the first fruit from his strength. The right of the firstborn is his. If a man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not listen to his father's voice or his mother's voice, even though they discipline him, he will not listen to them, then his father and mother shall lay hold to him and bring him out to the elders of the city, to the gate of his place. And they shall say to the elders of the city, this son of ours is stubborn and rebellious, and he will not listen to our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. And all the men of the city shall stone him with stones, and he shall die. So you shall put away the evil from among you, that all Israel shall hear and fear. Now, some people will say in a sarcastic way, oh, what am I supposed to do, kill my child if he doesn't listen to me according to the law? Those are people that will say we no longer need to follow Torah. Well, one of the major points of Torah is to destroy the evil root before it starts contaminating the rest of the community. And this is a wonderful example, and I promise you, if this happens once, there's going to start being very rebellious children around the neighborhood. But when this happens, it creates a problem. You know, in Proverbs it says, do not dine with drunkards or feast with gluttons. And here it is, it's calling this son a glutton and a drunkard. And he's being rebellious against his family, and it's after the discipline. So they already tried to take care of the situation. Well, the evil root has to be weeded out, folks. And again, the times back then were different than they are today. But I can tell you many of the issues we have today are because the evil root is not weeded out, and the children aren't disciplined at all to begin with, let alone this next step of having them stoned if they're not disciplined. So I'm not condoning murder. I'm not condoning killing somebody because they're disobedient. But I'm telling you what the Scriptures say and the reason. And it says, so you shall put away the evil from among you, that all Israel shall hear and fear. So to be disobedient, a drunkard, and a glutton is evil. So remember that. To overeat, to be a glutton and eat anything, to be a drunkard and drink and overdrink, it's considered as evil according to our Creator's words right here. So it goes on in verse 22, and if a man has committed a sin worthy of death, and he is executed, and you hang him on a tree, his body shall not remain all night on a tree, but surely you shall bury him the same day. And it says here to note, the rebellion at home would lead to rebellion in society. And this is a very good note. Now, when we look at hanging him on a tree, Israel's way we have the electric chair today as capital punishment. Back then, it was stoning, which was very common. But here they're being told to hang him on a tree, which really wasn't enforced in Israel at the time because they were stoning. But it's just another example, as I said when we started this Torah portion, It's difficult to understand these things today, but I assure you, you weren't walking down a street in Israel and every tree had somebody hanging on them because they were disobedient or rebellious. It wasn't like today. The communities, the children were very obedient, and the people there were brought up in an obedient way, because if they were disobedient, they were told to be stoned by the community. So you didn't have rebellious children running around the streets creating havoc, and it was completely different than the times today. And if one of those rotten apples would get out of hand, they would take care of it, and it would be known. When you walk down the street and you see somebody hanging on the street because of something he shouldn't have been doing, I assure you those people are going to start doing things they should be doing. And these are things that happened back then. So, for he that is hanged and reproached to Elohim, you shall not defile your land, which Yahweh your Elohim has given you as your inheritance. So they had to take down his body and bury the body, so on. Now we're going to go to verse 22, and the last verse is very controversial, but again, multiple wives and stoning children, those are certainly two things that the non-Torah people want to attack and say, oh, we don't have to do those things and we're released from the law and we don't got to do these things. Well, first of all, we're not commanded to have multiple wives, and if it goes against the law of the land, then we can't have multiple wives where we're living. If you want multiple wives, go to a land where they allow it. But I'm just giving you what Scripture says here, and Yeshua came to clarify a lot of these things, even divorce, because of the hardness of their heart. Men wanted to get a divorce and try to like have a second chance or a loophole out of something. But no, our Creator hates divorce, and He allows it, but He doesn't like it. And I'm sure He allows multiple marriages, but it's not His ideal. And so we see things that are allowed. It just doesn't mean that it was ideal. And we want the best we can do, and that's the key. And as for stoning children and killing people that are rebellious, well, we have to destroy the evil root from the society. And today, a more appropriate thing would be to kick that person out of the community. But then where's he going to go? He's going to go to another community and create problems. Or he's going to go into society and create problems. Well, kidnapping, rape, and murder, these things were punishable by death during scriptural times. And today they throw somebody in jail and our tax money has to pay for them. And look at the society it's created. And you didn't have these problems back then as we do today, with the just abundant amount of all these things happening on a regular basis. And we need to get back to the scriptural way if we want things to be more successful and more in the scriptural manner the way it was here. So let's go to chapter 22. And it's more strange things here, and more things because it's not in our culture. Chapter 22, it says, you shall not see your brother's ox or his sheep driven away and hide yourself from them. Surely you shall return them back to your brother. So if you see this, you have to take action and do something. And if your brother is not near you and you do not know him, when you shall surely bring it home to your house, it shall be with you until your brother inquires of it, and you shall restore it to him. And so you shall do it with his donkey, and so you shall do it with his clothing, and so you do it with his everything lost of your brothers, which he has lost and you have found, and you may not hide it. You shall not see your brother's donkey or his ox fallen down on the highway, and hide yourself from them. You shall surely help him lift it up. So it was a requirement and a command to help your fellow brother. You couldn't just walk by, you had to help them. And this reminds me of when I go and I'm driving and I stop at a red light and I see people there with asking for money or food or something else, and people just ignore them and keep driving. Many people are coming up from church and they ignore somebody and keep driving. No, you shall not pretend you haven't seen when somebody's in distress. You need to help them. Now, here is one I use often because I teach about modesty on Torah Life Ministries. But it says, there shall not be the thing of a man or a woman, nor shall a man put on a woman's garment, for whoever does these things is an abomination to Yahweh your Elohim. High heels and makeup were first worn by men before they were worn by women. So does that mean a woman is committing Torah, a sin, if she puts on high heels or makeup? Well, I would say maybe, but not for that particular reason, because here I think they're talking about the attitude, or what man shall not do what a woman's supposed to do, and a woman shall not do what a man's supposed to do, in terms of the attitude. Men and women had different roles in society and a different way to carry them out. And a man shall not act like a woman, and a woman shall not act like a man. And I say often, many of the times reasons we have such a problem today is because men want to look like women and women want to act like men, and that's creating a big issue. And it clearly shows in Scripture the roles of a man and woman. But if we look at dress particularly, there's a good note here that says, up until the 1960s, in the era of rebellion, pants were man's garments and not worn by women. In many conservative countries today, dresses are still worn by women, including the religious community of Jerusalem. So we see here, even though pants is not defined at all in Scripture as outer garments, they're undergarments for the priest. That's the only time they were defined in Scripture. All the men wear tunics and women wear tunics as well, different types of tunics to distinguish a man from a woman. But they should not wear the same types of clothes. Today, when you look at this topic, the topic of modesty in general, it's just a complete abomination of what men and women are doing, how they're dressing, how they're acting and carrying themselves. And many oftentimes you can't tell the difference between a man or a woman because of the way they're dressed. And many times you could tell too clearly because they're not dressed. And I want everyone, if you're interested in this topic more, I have a lecture, Modesty According to the Scriptures. And you need to check that out and see more on this topic. And so verse 6 says, if a bird's nest happens to be before you in the way of any tree, or on the ground with young ones or eggs, and the mother is sitting on the young or on the eggs, you shall not take the mother with the young. But in every case you shall let the mother go, and take the young for yourself, so that it may be well with you, and you may prolong your days. So this is one of those strange parables of Scripture, which is really quite hard to understand. There's a reference here of Isaiah 10:14. So we turn to Isaiah 10:14. It says, and my hand has found the riches of the people, like a nest. I also have gathered all the earth, as forsaken eggs are gathered. And there was not one moving a wing, or opening a mouth, or one chirping. Now let me read the verse before and after that. In the verse before that, in 13, it says, for he who says, I have worked by the strength of my own hand and my wisdom, for I am wise, and I take away the borders of the people. I have robbed their treasures, and like a mighty one I have subdued the inhabitants. And then verse 15 says, shall the axe glorify itself over him chopping with it, or shall the sword magnify itself over him moving it? As if a rod could wave those who lift it, and as if a staff could raise what is not wood. So in verse 13 and 15 of Isaiah, it's talking about, and we look at this in the Scripture, people thinking that they're in control, when no, Yahweh, our Creator, is really in control, and people glorifying themselves. Where in the Scriptures we just read it a couple of Torah portions ago, where it says, don't think that you've done these things by your own hand and you're good. No, you're just as bad, but you are chosen. Well, then we go to verse 14, the one in the middle here, and it says, and my hand has found the riches of the people, like a nest. I have gathered all the earth, as forsaken eggs are gathered. And there was not one moving a wing, or opening a mouth, or one chirping. And then when we go back here to verse 6 of Deuteronomy chapter 22, it says, if a bird's nest happens to be on before you in the way of the tree, or on the ground with young ones or eggs, and the mother is sitting on the young, or the eggs, you shall not take the mother with the young. And basically, it's this verse right here will equate to that. And again, it's a parable that the culture will understand back then, and apparently this might have happened more often back then, where somebody would be walking down the street and seeing a bird's nest fall from a tree or something. And it's giving you these instructions and guidelines very hard to comprehend and understand today. And then verse 7, but in every case you shall let the mother go and take the young for yourself, so that it may be well with you and you may prolong your days. So it's very difficult today, but you got to equate the parable to either Isaiah's verse there, or just try to comprehend the way they lived back then, and not an easy thing to do. And this one's still quite confusing even after you do all that. So you're not going to get it all right away, you're not going to understand it all, and don't worry if you don't, but don't skip it over, because eventually you will get these things. Verse 8 says, when you build a new house, then you shall make a guardrail for your roof, so that you do not put blood on your house if someone falls from it. Well, that seems like a common sense thing to do. If somebody's on the roof, you don't want them to fall off, so put a guardrail. You shall not sow your vineyard with different kinds of seeds, that the fruit of your seed which you have sown and the fruit of your vineyard not be defiled. Well, and I would use this scripture here to talk about the hybridization of food, the man-made hybridization, not necessarily the GMO, which is a dysfunctional seed, but the multiple seeds and the hybridized foods today, or the seedless food as well. It says, the fruit of your seed which you have sown. So basically they're saying the food should come from a seed. So if you have a seedless watermelon, I would say that's not Torah. It says not to do these things. So if it's a hybridization naturally by man, if the wind blows the seed into another field with other seed, that's one thing. But if you purposely do it, well, it says here, you shall not sow your vineyard with two different kinds of seeds. So two things here. Number one, seeds were important. Seeded food came from seeds. Very important to have the seeds in the food and not the hybridized foods, the seedless food. And then the other thing here would not to mix the food. So today you might have a plum and a pear, pluot, or a plum and an apricot, pluot. So these foods today that are mixed, well, here it talks against that. You shall not plow an axe with a donkey together. Now, an axe and a donkey together, if you try to do that, which you don't have to today because we got machinery, as I said, their steps are different. It's not going to work. It's just going to be uneven. But you're told not to do that. Now, verse 11, you shall not wear a garment of different kinds of wool and linen together. And this is one that many people disregard, but we're told to wear things made of 100% natural fibers. This is linen. I have other shirts that are cotton, but it can't be linen and cotton. It can't be both in the same. And this is something that a lot of people just completely ignore in Scripture. Here's another one, verse 12. It says, you shall make for yourself tassels on the four corners of your cloak, which you cover with. So here's my tassels. They're my tzitz, and there's a blue one in the middle, which it says have one blue, and that represents Yeshua. And we're commanded as believer in Yeshua Messiah to have tassels on our clothes. But here's the thing that a lot of people break. It says on your cloak. So we are commanded to wear tunics to cover our bodies and not just have tassels at the end of a t-shirt or an undershirt and not wear anything else. So we're commanded to wear a cloak, a cover-up. It's very important for those of you that are wearing tzitz to understand about dressing modestly as well. Verse 13 says, if a man takes a wife and goes into her and hates her, then makes against her shameful charges and brings up evil in the name on her, and says, I took this woman, and when I came near her, I did not find her token of virginity. Then the girl's father and her mother shall take and bring the girl's tokens of virginity to the elders of the city in the gate. And the girl's father shall say to the elders, I have given my daughter to this man for a wife, and he hates her. And behold, he has laid shameful charges, saying, I have not found your daughter the tokens of virginity. And yet I see the tokens of my daughter's virginity, and they shall spread the garment before the elders of the city. And the elders of the city shall take that man and punish him. And they shall find him 100 pieces of silver, and give to them the girl's father, because he has brought an evil name on the Virgin of Israel. And she shall be his wife, he may not put her away in all his days. But if this thing is true, that the tokens of virginity have not been found for the girl, then they shall bring out the girl to the door of her father's house, and the men of the city shall stone her with stones, and shall die, for she has done folly in Israel to commit fornication in her father's house, and you shall put away the evil from among you. And again, this is a judgment for the judges of Israel, and we read that the judges must be righteous in Israel, but to destroy the evil root and keep the community holy. And this wasn't happening abundantly back then because of these strict rules. I've been to Singapore years ago, and if you did anything such as throwing gum on the floor, you would get a serious fine. And people kept and followed the law there. But when you go to places where, like the United States, where the judges are so back and forth on each particular case and so on, there's no righteousness left in this country, and people do whatever they feel is best, and they don't listen to the law of the land. Well, there are strict punishments at the beginning, so people afterwards would follow. Now, is it fair that the man would only get fined for lying, but the woman would be stoned if she didn't have these tokens of virginity? Well, I have a whole paragraph or a whole teaching on my Yeshua Said series on marriage and what's allowed for divorce and what's allowed for marriage and so on, which you can listen to. I'll put the link below this video here. And that really will clarify up what it has to say about that. Now, verse 22 says, if a man is found lying with a woman married to a husband, then they shall both of them die, the man that lay with the woman, and you shall put away this evil from Israel. So there was no adultery where adulterers were walking around set free. No, if they were caught in adultery, they were put to death, the man and the woman. And if there is a girl that is a virgin betrothed to a man, and the man finds her in the city, and they commit fornication together, then you shall bring them out to the gate of the city, and you shall stone them with stones, so that they die. The girl because she did not cry out, being in the city, and the man because he has humbled his neighbor's wife, and shall put away the evil from among you. But if a man finds a betrothed girl in the field, and the man forces and lies with her, and then only the man that lie with her shall die, and you shall do nothing to the girl. The girl has no sin worthy of death. For as when a man rises against his neighbor and murders him, even so is this matter. For he has found her in the field, and the betrothed girl cried out, but no one saved her. If a man finds a virgin girl not being betrothed, and manipulates her, and commits fornication with her, and they be found, then the man lying with her shall give to the girl's father 50 pieces of silver, and she shall be his wife, because he has humbled her. He may not put her away for all his days. So there are in certain cases where divorce was never ever allowed, and there are other cases where if there was adultery committed, either the man or the woman, or fornication even committed, either the man or the woman, maybe one of them would have been put to death in certain cases, not always both of them. So you had to look at everything on a separate basis, and not just say all of a sudden they commit adultery, they both die. No, it depends on the circumstances. And this is just going into some of the circumstances, because Moses knew going into the promised land what was happening back then. He was revealed to him what was going on in the land amongst the Canaanites and how people were. And these instructions were given to him via Yahweh to let the people know what the outcomes of these judgments should be. Today we have law books, so if a lawyer is defending a case, they might look back at history and see if the Supreme Court voted one way or another way on a particular case to help his case, saying, well, this has come up actually already, and this was the verdict to support his case. Well, this is those law books. To support a case, if something came up, this would be the lawyer's defense saying, well, this is what it says in the book. This is what it says, so that's my defense. And that's the way it is. So verse 30, a man shall not take his father's wife, and shall not uncover his father's skirt. Again, we looked at that in Leviticus about the types of relationships people are to have or not have with their neighbors and their family and so on. Now we're going to get up to chapter 23, and I told you this was a heavy Torah portion with a lot of different topics jumping around. But this is important because this is coming towards the closing of the Torah, and these are the things Moses wanted to make sure the people knew, or Yahweh wanted to make sure they knew these things. Because these would come up, and these were the law books, so to say, at the time. Now we're up to chapter 23, and there's going to be some more unique things that are found here that might not be necessarily happening today, but still, number one, he being crushed or cut into his male member shall not enter into the assembly of Yahweh. First of all, I don't know how somebody would check this, so somebody would have to be righteous, but it says here in the note, it seems to indicate that someone was purposely doing this to mimic a pagan practice. Regardless of why they're doing it, it says that he may not enter into this. Verse 2 says, an illegitimate child shall not enter into the congregation of Yahweh, even to the 10th generation. None of his shall enter into the assembly of Yahweh. An Amorite or Moabite shall not enter into the congregation of Yahweh. Even to the 10th generation shall none of them enter into the assembly of Yahweh, because they did not meet with your bread and with your water in the way which you came out of Egypt, and because they hired against you in Balaam the son of Beor from Pethro, Mesopotamia, to curse you. But Yahweh your Elohim would not listen to Balaam, and Yahweh your Elohim turned the curse into a blessing to you, because Yahweh Elohim loved you. You shall not seek their peace nor their prosperity in all your days. You shall not despise an Edomite, for he is your brother. You shall not despise an Egyptian, for you were alien in his land. sons of the third generation that are born to them may enter into the assembly of Yahweh. When you go forth into the camp against your enemies, then keep yourself from every evil thing. So here they are talking about, first of all, who's able to enter the assembly and who's not able to enter the assembly. But verse 9 of chapter 23, when you shall go forth into camp against your enemies, then keep yourself from every living thing. So we can relate this principle in today's world. When you go within the world, keep yourself from every evil thing. So it's a fight. It's a fight against our flesh when we're in the world today. And we got to keep ourselves from these evil things of the world, which our flesh wants to appease. So that is a very powerful verse. When you go forth into camp against your enemies, then keep yourself from every evil thing. Well, the world is the camp. It's Satan's camp. And we have to fight this evil temptation of our flesh. Remember that, folks. That is a powerful verse. If there is among you any man who is not clean because of a discharge at night, then he shall go outside of the camp, and he shall not come into the middle of the camp. And it shall be as an evening is turning, he shall bathe in water, and the sun is going, he shall come into the middle of the camp. And you shall have a place outside the camp, you shall go out there. And you shall have a tool on your staff, and it shall be as you sit outside, you shall dig with it, and shall turn back, and shall cover that which comes from you. So it's talking about going to the bathroom. Remember, plumbing wasn't a common thing back then. So they were told to go outside the camp, do what they had to do and bury it and come back into camp. For Yahweh your Elohim walks in the middle of your camp to deliver you and give you up your enemies. Therefore your camp shall be holy, that he may see no unclean thing in you and turn away from you. So nothing unclean was about to be in the camp, and this was including when you went to the bathroom. Everything in the camp was supposed to be holy and set apart. Verse 15, you shall not hand over his master a slave that is escaped from his master to you. He shall live with you among you in the place which he chose inside one of your gates. Whatever it is good to him, you shall not oppress him. There shall be no harlot among the daughters of Israel, nor shall there be a homosexual among the sons of Israel. How clearly does it need to be written? Now, this is what society does today. The Christian community, they'll shun the homosexual, which they should, because it says there should be no homosexual among you. But do they shun the harlot? No. They congratulate the harlot and make them a movie star. But it says, there shall be no harlot among the daughters of Israel, nor shall there be homosexual among the daughters of Israel. Years ago, I was doing a lecture, and somebody raised their hand and asked me a question. If my son is a homosexual, should I kick him out of the house? And I said, well, if your son was straight and sleeping with other girls out of marriage, committing fornication, would you be thinking the same thing? So homosexuality and harlotry were both considered abominations according to Israel, according to the scriptures, and defiled the camp. Verse 18, you shall not bring the hire of a prostitute or the price of a dog into the house of Yahweh your Elohim. For any vow, for even both of these are an abomination to Yahweh your Elohim. You shall not lend at interest to your brother, interest of silver, interest of food, interest of anything loaned at interest. So you would not give your fellow brother a loan and expect something more in return than what you gave him. To a stranger you may lend interest, but you shall not lend at the interest to your brother, so that Yahweh your Elohim may bless you in all you put your hand to do in a land where you go to possess it. So, if it was not brother, if it was a foreigner, then you could charge them interest, but not to a stranger. Verse 21, when you shall vow a vow to Yahweh your Elohim, you shall not delay to perform it. For Yahweh your Elohim will certainly require it of you, and it shall be sin to you. So if you don't fulfill your vow immediately, it's considered a sin according to the scripture. But if you shall forbear to vow it, shall be no sin to you. So if you actually did your vow or committed it, the vow that you promised, then it was no sin. That which is gone out of your lips you shall keep, and you shall do it, according to as you have vowed, as your free will offering to Yahweh your Elohim. Do even that which you have spoken with your mouth. And there's a note here, a good note. It says verses 21:1 to 23, which you just read. It says, Today, people take lightly making commitments to both Yahweh and man, and then casually break them without wanting any consequences. Here we see that when one vows something to Yahweh, he is bound to fulfill his word, and that is why the marriage covenant, till death do us part. As they vowed this very thing Yahweh each other and entered into covenant relationship. So that's a vow you make it to Yahweh when you're getting married. And then to go back on it and divorce would go directly against these verses we just read here about making a vow. And it was a sin. Verse 24, when you come into your neighbor's vineyard, you may eat grapes to your fill at your pleasure, but you shall not put any in your vessel. So it kind of reminds me of an all-you-can-eat place. You can eat as much as you want when you're there, but when you leave, you can't take any with you. When you come into your neighbor's standing grain, then you may pluck heads with your hand, but you shall not move a sickle into your neighbor's standing grain. So now we're going to get up to chapter 24 here, but you can see, as I said at the beginning, there's many little different laws or guidelines, and Moses is just winding down, getting ready for the end of the book of Deuteronomy, winding down on all these things that Yah told him to give the message to the people. Verse 24, when a man has taken a wife and married her, and it happens that she finds no favor in his eyes, because he has found a thing of uncleanness in her, and he writes her a bill of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of the house. If she goes out from his house and goes and becomes another man's wife, or if the latter husband who took her to be his wife dies, her former husband who sent her away is not to take her again to be his wife after she is defiled. For it is an abomination before Yahweh, and you shall not cause the land to sin which Yahweh your Elohim is given to you as an inheritance. Now, there wasn't to be divorce to begin with, so this shouldn't have been an issue. But if it was saying once a man and a woman divorced, they couldn't remarry later on. And that's what it was saying here. When a man has taken a new wife, he shall not go out to war. He shall not be given anything to do. He shall be free at his own house for 1 year, and shall gladden his wife with whom he has taken. And we spoke about this in last week's Torah portion. No one shall take a pledge and lower the upper millstone, for he has taken a man's life to pledge. And we look at this, the millstone here was used to grind flour for bread, and it was essentially for the survival of one's family. So it says you weren't allowed to take this away from the man. Verse 7, if a man is found stealing a person of his brothers of the sons of Israel, and has dealt with him as a slave, and sold him, then that thief shall die, and you shall put away the evil from among you. How many times have we read this week, you shall put away the evil from among you, or keep the community separate and set apart? Be on guard in the plague of leprosy, that you watch closely and do according to all that the Levitical priests shall teach you, as I commanded them, so you shall be careful to do them. Remember that which Yahweh Elohim did to Miriam and away as you came out of Egypt. When you lend your neighbor any kind of loan, you shall not go into his house to get his pledge. You shall stand outside, and the man to whom lend it shall bring the pledge outside to you. And if the man is poor, you shall not sleep with his pledge. You shall certainly give back the pledge to him at sundown, and he shall lie down in his own clothing and shall bless you, and it shall be righteousness to you before Yahweh your Elohim. You shall not oppress a poor and needy hired servant of your brothers or of your aliens who are in your land within your gates. In the same day you shall give him hire. Do not let the sun go down on it, for he is poor and he has lifted up his heart on it, that he did not cry against you to Yahweh and be sin against you. The fathers shall not be executed for the sons, and the sons shall not be executed for the fathers. They shall each be executed for his own sin. You shall not pervert judgment of an alien or of an orphan, and you shall not take a widow's garment as a pledge. You shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and Yahweh your Elohim redeemed and Yahweh your Elohim redeemed you from there. For that reason I command you to do this thing. When you cut down your harvest in your field, and you have forgotten a sheaf in the field, you shall not turn back to take it. It shall be for the alien, for the orphan, and for the widow, so that Yahweh your Elohim shall bless you in all the work of your hand. When you beat your olive tree, and you shall not search the branch behind you, It shall be for the alien, for the orphan, and for the widow. When you gather the grapes of your vineyard, you shall not glean it afterward. It shall be for the alien, for the orphan, and for the widow. And you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. On account of this, I am commanding you to do this thing. So we were told and commanded in Scripture, and Yeshua showed this too, to take care of the orphan and to take care of the widow and to take care of the alien. You were once aliens, and the orphan and widows you're called to take care of. That's what righteousness is about. And these are more laws and judgments that are found here that might not necessarily apply to us today. And we always say, as a believer, what of the Torah commands should we be following? And the answer is every one we possibly can. So if you do have a field of olives or grapes, well, then you follow this, and you don't just go pick up every one, you leave some behind. If you don't have a field of olive or grapes, then you don't have to worry about this particular command here. But it's still remembering the principle to take care of the alien, the widow, and the orphan, as it's commanding us to do here. So with all these judgments, if it doesn't apply to you, don't follow them. If you don't have a field with an ox and a donkey, you don't have to worry about that command not to plow them together. But if you do, that's what the command is, and you got to follow what you can follow. All right, we're up to verse 25 here. It says, if people dispute and seek its resolution in court, and the judge renders a decision in favor of the righteous one, and condemneth the wicked one, then if the wicked one deserves to be flogged, the judge is to have him lie down and be flogged in his presence. The number of strokes to be given to his offense, but the maximum number is 40. He is not to exceed this, for he goes over this limit and beats him more than this, your brother will be humiliated before your eyes. So this was, again, one of the common punishments that were in that day, and it was very different than today. They would call that torture and abuse today, but back then they called it righteousness, and it was something that kept the community holy, which what they were told to do. Another thing here, you are not to muzzle an ox when it is treading out grain. And then another one in verse 5, if brothers live together and one of them dies childless, and his widow is not to marry someone unrelated to him, her husband's brother is to go into her and to perform the duty of his brother-in-law by marrying her. The first child she bears will succeed the name of his dead brother, so that the name will not be eliminated from Israel. If a man does not wish to marry his brother's widow, then his brother's widow is to go up into the gate of the leaders and say, my brother-in-law refuses to raise up for his brother the name of Israel, and he will not perform the duty of a husband, a brother for me. The leaders of the town are to summon him and speak to him. And if appearing before him continues to say, I don't want to marry her, then his brother's widow is to approach him in the presence of the leaders, pull his sandal off his foot, and spit in the face and say, this is what is done to the man who refused to build up the brother's family. From that time on his family is to be known in Israel as the family of the man who has had his sandal pulled off. Now, pulling somebody's sandal off and spitting in their face for not doing something like this doesn't seem like a big important thing. So what? But back then, again, things were very different, and keeping the community pure and holy was very important. And this was something that seems odd today, that something like this would happen, but we have to remember the culture and the customs back then. And for those of you on that same token that say that multiple wives are never allowed and so on, well, we're commanded to take care of the widows. And this was one of the ways to take care of the brother's widow. And now the major point was to make sure that she has a son and the brother's name can be carried on here. But it's still the point of, if you are taking a multiple wife, whether it's taking a widow or another wife, there has to be a righteous reason behind it, not just because I want to sleep with more women. But again, this is another topic for another time about multiple wives and so on. But here, it's something, people say, well, what commandment should we be doing according to Torah? Well, there are some things that are cultural and some things that just would not be allowed in this culture today. So we have to look at the land, and we have to look at all of these things of not just what we should do, want to do, but what we could do. And that's ultimately how it comes down to, what can we do? And it's against the law to do something like this today, obviously, in the United States, but this was something that happened quite commonly in the community of Israel. Here's another one, verse 11, 25:11. If men are fighting with each other, and the wife of one comes up to help her husband get away from the man attacking him by grabbing the attacker's private parts with her hand, you are to cut off her hand and show no pity. Again, these things might sound strange to us, but all I'll say is, ladies, if your husband's fighting with another man, take out a gun and shoot that other man, or hit him over the head with a bat, but don't pull his genitals, because that's not Torah, okay? The only man's private parts you should be touching are your husband's, and even in battle. All right. You are not to have in your pack 2 sets of weights, one heavy and the other light. You are not to have in your house 2 sets of measures, one big and the other small. You are to have correct and fair weight, and you are to have correct and fair measurements, so that you will prolong your days in a land Yahweh Elohim is giving to you. For all who do such a thing, all who deal dishonestly, are detestable to Yahweh your Elohim. So being honest was one of the major things to keep the community holy. And to have a full set of weights was considered an abomination. To deceive your fellow brother, an abomination. And in the name of money, that's what they did quite often in those days. Verse 17, remember what Amalek did to you on the road as you were coming out of Egypt, how he met you by the road, attacked those in the rear, those who were exhausted and straggling behind when you were tired and weary. He did not fear our wonderful Creator. Therefore, when Yahweh your Elohim has given you rest from all your surrounding enemies in a land Yahweh your Elohim has given you as your inheritance to possess, you are to blot out all memory of Amalek from under the heavens, and don't forget. All right, everybody, that's this week's Torah portion, and I know it seemed a little strange, but again, these are the things that they were called to do when they went into the land, and culturally, that's what was going on at that time. Of these, what should we be doing today? Well, with all of Torah, when people say, what should we be doing today? What we can. If we can't keep it, there's no reason to do it. But if we can keep it, we keep it. All right? If we're allowed to as well. All right, that was this week's Torah portion. Read it, not just on Shabbat. Read it now throughout the rest of the week, so Shabbat you're prepared to discuss it with your fellow community. And now, next week's Torah portion is going to be the 50th reading in this year's cycle, which is going to be Deuteronomy 26:1 to 29:8. Deuteronomy 26:1 to 29:8. All right, if you have any comments or questions, post them below the video. Until then, everybody, have a wonderful Shabbat next Shabbat, and Shalom, Shalom.
Come out of the world, oh my people, seek the truth, avoid the evil, learn Yahweh's ways, Torah Life Ministries, come out of the world.